The doll wasn't something I'd normally buy. Its porcelain face was cracked in places, and its faded eyes seemed too lifelike. But something about it caught my attention at the garage sale. The woman selling it didn't try to convince me. She just handed it over with a peculiar smile and said, "Be careful with her." That night, I put the doll on a shelf in my room. It stared out with those faded eyes, watching as I got ready for bed. I was half asleep when I heard the voice. "Megan Marie." I jolted awake, my heart racing. The room was silent, but the voice had been so clear, like someone whispering right next to my ear. I glanced at the doll, its unblinking eyes fixed on me. "Megan Marie." The whisper came again, softer this time. My blood ran cold. I sat upright in bed, clutching the blanket as my eyes darted to the shelf. The doll hadn't moved. Its cracked porcelain face was still tilted slightly to the side, its faded eyes staring lifelessly into the room. My chest heaved as I tried to calm myself. "It's just your imagination," I whispered, trying to reassure myself. But my voice sounded thin, weak, even to my own ears. The whisper had been so clear, though, too clear to be in my head. I didn't sleep much after that. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound outside the window made my skin crawl. By the time morning light crept through the blinds, I felt more exhausted than rested. Determined to shake off the unease, I grabbed the doll and inspected it. Up close, the cracks in its face seemed deeper, the faded eyes slightly more defined than I remembered. I shook my head. "You're just tired," I muttered to myself, setting the doll back on the shelf. I tried to ignore the doll for the rest of the day. I left the house for errands, met up with a friend for lunch, and pretended everything was fine. But when I came home, I felt the unease return. As I walked into my room, I froze. The doll wasn't on the shelf anymore. It was sitting in the armchair by the window, its body slumped slightly, its chipped fingers resting on the armrest. My pulse quickened. I knew I hadn't moved it. I approached cautiously, swallowing the lump in my throat. "How?" My voice trailed off as I reached out to pick it up. The porcelain felt colder than I remembered, almost like ice. I placed it back on the shelf, forcing myself to breathe. "It's just a coincidence," I said aloud, though the words felt hollow. I must have moved it earlier and forgot. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. That night I kept the light on, determined to avoid the creeping darkness that seemed to amplify the doll's presence. But it didn't matter. The voice came again. "Megan Marie." I bolted upright, my eyes darting to the shelf. This time the doll's head was tilted slightly, as if it were watching me. I resolved to get rid of it. I grabbed the doll, shoved it into a box, and carried it outside. The garbage truck was rumbling down the street, and I sprinted to the curb, tossing the box in without hesitation. I watched as the truck's mechanical arm grabbed the trash bin and emptied it into the compactor. The doll was gone. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as I walked back to the house. For the rest of the day, I avoided my room. I told myself it was over, but part of me still felt uneasy. That night, I forced myself to go to bed as usual. I left the light on again, though, unwilling to let the darkness creep in. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to a noise, a soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. My heart sank as I realized it was coming from inside the room. I turned my head slowly, my breath caught in my throat. The doll was back. It sat on the shelf, exactly where it had been before, but something was different. Its face had a new crack running across its cheek, and its expression seemed off. Its eyes looked sharper, more lifelike, almost gleaming in the dim light. I stumbled out of bed, my legs shaking. "No," I whispered, backing away. "No, no, no." I threw you away. The room felt colder, and the air grew heavier. The doll didn't move, but I could feel its presence, its energy pressing down on me. And then I saw it, Scratched into the wood of the shelf beneath the doll were 3 words. I'm still here. I screamed, grabbing the doll and throwing it across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud and fell to the floor, but the sense of relief didn't come. The whispers started again, faint but insistent. Megan Marie. Megan Marie. I ran from the room, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded as I fumbled for my phone, dialing the friend who had been with me at the garage sale. You need to come over, I said, my voice trembling. It's the doll. It came back. There was a long pause on the other end before my friend finally said, Megan, it's just a doll. You're probably overthinking it. No, I said, almost shouting. You don't understand. It knows my name. It's alive. I hung up before my friend could respond. The whispers had stopped, but the silence was worse. I crept back to the room, gripping a flashlight like it was a weapon. Slowly, I opened the door. The doll was no longer on the floor where I had thrown it. It was sitting on my bed. I froze in the doorway, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The doll sat on the edge of my bed, its legs dangling over the side like it was waiting for me. Its face was different now, its cracks deeper, jagged like lightning scars. The once lifeless eyes gleamed in the light, almost wet, almost alive. My breaths came in shallow gasps. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The air felt thick, pressing down on me, as though the room itself had become heavier. Megan Marie, the doll whispered, its voice carrying a sing-song lilt. The sound wasn't faint anymore. It was clear, unmistakable, like someone standing right beside me. Why are you doing this? I croaked, my voice barely audible. The doll didn't respond. It sat perfectly still, yet I felt its gaze follow me as I stepped into the room. The scratching sound returned, low and deliberate, coming from the shelf where the doll had once sat. My eyes flicked to the wood, and my stomach churned. More words had been scratched into the surface. You brought me here. No, I whispered, shaking my head. I didn't. I don't even know you. The doll's head tilted slightly, its painted mouth curling into a faint smile. You don't remember? It asked, the whisper almost playful. A jolt of terror shot through me. The voice was mine. I stumbled back, tripping over a corner of the rug. The flashlight fell from my hand, its beam rolling across the floor. Darkness flooded the corners of the room, but the doll didn't move. It didn't have to. The weight of its presence was unbearable, suffocating. You belong to me now, it said, its voice sharper, more menacing. No, I don't, I shouted, scrambling to my feet. My hands shook as I grabbed the flashlight and swung it at the doll. It hit with a crack, the sound echoing through the room. The doll toppled over, its porcelain face shattering against the floor. For a moment, the air lifted, and I thought it was over. Then, the pieces began to move. The fragments of porcelain twitched and skittered across the floor, dragging themselves toward the doll's body. I watched in horror as the shards reassembled, the cracks on the doll's face sealing themselves shut. Its eyes snapped open, brighter and sharper than before. It stood up. Megan Marie, it whispered again, its voice a guttural growl. You can't break me. I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded as I pressed my back against the wall, my mind racing. I needed to end this. My mind raced, replaying the doll's guttural whisper. My hands shook uncontrollably, but I knew I couldn't just leave it in there. My eyes darted toward the hallway closet, where I kept an old wooden bat. It wasn't much, but it was the only weapon I could think of. I grabbed it, gripping it tightly as I moved back to the bedroom door. The air around me felt colder, heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. I hesitated for only a moment before turning the knob. The door creaked open, revealing the room bathed in shadows. The doll wasn't sitting on the bed anymore. It was standing. In the middle of the room, the doll's tiny form seemed impossibly imposing. Its cracked porcelain face twisted into a grotesque imitation of a smile, and its eyes gleamed with a malevolent light. "Megan Marie," it hissed, its voice echoing unnaturally. "You can't break me." A surge of anger overcame my fear. "Watch me," I said through gritted teeth. I lunged forward, swinging the bat with all my strength. The wood connected with the doll's head, shattering it into pieces. The fragments scattered across the floor, their edges glinting in the dim light. For a moment, the room was silent, but then the pieces began to move. The shards of porcelain twitched and skittered across the floor, dragging themselves toward the doll's shattered body. My stomach churned as the pieces reassembled before my eyes, the cracks sealing themselves as if nothing had happened. The doll's head snapped back into place, its eyes brighter than ever. Its expression was no longer neutral, it was furious. "You'll never win," it growled, its voice deeper, almost inhuman. Desperation surged through me. Destroying it wasn't enough. It was tied to me somehow. It knew my name, my energy. There had to be another way. The words from the garage sale woman echoed in my mind. Be careful with her. I couldn't destroy the doll, but I could trap it. I ran to the kitchen, searching frantically through drawers until I found what I needed: a box of salt. My heart pounded as I grabbed a lighter and a candle from the counter. Back in the room, the doll had moved again. It now stood in the doorway, blocking my path, its head tilted unnaturally as it watched me. "This ends now," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. The doll didn't move, but I felt its presence bearing down on me, filling the room with an oppressive weight. I poured the salt in a wide circle around it, my hand shaking but determined. As I lit the candle, the doll's voice grew louder, a mix of whispers and growls. "You can't stop me," it hissed. "I'm part of you now." Ignoring its taunts, I began to chant. The words weren't mine. They came unbidden, like an instinct buried deep in my mind. The flame from the candle flickered, then flared, casting the room in an eerie glow. The doll screamed. It wasn't the high-pitched cry of a child. It was a deep guttural wail that shook the walls. Its body writhed within the circle, its porcelain cracking again. The light in its eyes dimmed, replaced by a faint glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Let me go," it begged, its voice now weak and trembling. I didn't stop. I repeated the chant louder, the words spilling from my lips like they belonged to someone else. The glow in the doll's eyes flickered one last time before fading completely. Its body fell limp, its porcelain cracking and crumbling into dust. The room grew still. I stared at the pile of ash and broken shards, my chest heaving. The air was lighter now, the oppressive weight gone. For the first time in days, the house felt normal again. But as I turned to leave the room, a single sound stopped me in my tracks. A faint knock. It came from the closet. With trembling hands, I opened the door. Sitting inside, perfectly intact, was the doll. Its porcelain face was unblemished, its eyes gleaming as it whispered, "Forever yours, Megan Marie." What would you do if a simple garage sale purchase turned into a nightmare? Share your thoughts or theories about Megan's chilling encounter in the comments below. I was driving home late, the kind of night where the road stretches endlessly and the only sound is the hum of the engine. The route was familiar, one I'd taken 100 times before. But tonight my GPS had other plans. "Turn left," it said, the calm, robotic voice breaking the silence. I frowned. That wasn't the way home. I ignored it at first, but it kept repeating, "Turn left, turn left, turn left." The insistence was unnerving, like the device knew something I didn't. Finally, I gave in, turning onto a narrow, unlit road that cut through the woods. Something felt wrong immediately. The air seemed heavier, the trees pressing closer as the road stretched on. My car clock was stuck at 11:13 p.m. no matter how far I drove, and the miles on the GPS weren't ticking down. Then the road opened up to a town I'd never seen before, though I'd grown up in this area. The houses were abandoned but eerily intact, their windows dark and curtains drawn. The GPS screen glitched and 3 chilling words flashed across it. "You've arrived." I stared at the glowing words on the GPS screen. "You've arrived." The robotic voice didn't repeat itself this time. It was silent now, as if waiting for me to take the next step. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, scanning the town from the safety of my car. The houses were unnervingly uniform, all 2-story structures with weathered gray siding and darkened windows. They looked untouched by time, neither decayed nor cared for. There wasn't a single light on, no movement, no sound. The only thing breaking the eerie stillness was the soft hum of my engine. I should have turned around. I should have ignored the GPS and gotten back onto the main road. But something held me there. A strange pull, like the town wanted me to stay. I pulled over to the side of the road and cut the engine. My headlights illuminated the nearest house, its curtains drawn tight as though hiding something inside. I told myself I just needed to get my bearings, figure out where I'd gone wrong. Reaching for my phone, I realized the screen was blank. It wouldn't turn on no matter how many times I pressed the button. I glanced back at the GPS, but the screen had gone completely black. A cold chill ran down my spine. I stepped out of the car hesitantly, my footsteps crunching softly on the cracked asphalt. The air was colder here, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. As I looked around, I noticed the streetlights. They weren't broken or damaged, but they didn't give off any light. The town felt frozen, like it was holding its breath. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, so soft I almost missed it. Laughter. High-pitched, like a child's giggle, echoing faintly from somewhere in the distance. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. It sounded too loud in the oppressive silence, swallowed up almost immediately. The laughter came again, closer this time. I turned toward the sound, my heart pounding. The curtains of the nearest house shifted slightly, as though someone had peeked out. "Is someone there?" I asked, stepping closer to the house. My breath puffed out invisible clouds, the cold deepening with each step. The door creaked open. The sight of the door opening on its own rooted me to the spot. The faint light of the moon barely illuminated the doorway, casting long shadows across the porch. I told myself not to go closer, that it was better to get back in the car and leave, but my legs seemed to move on their own. Before I realized it, I was standing at the foot of the porch steps, staring up at the darkened doorway. "Hello?" I called again, my voice cracking. The laughter came once more, echoing softly from inside the house. This time, it wasn't playful. It sounded wrong, distorted, as though multiple voices were layered over each other. I stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned under my weight, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. The air inside the house was colder than outside, and it smelled faintly of damp wood and something metallic. My eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness, revealing a living room frozen in time. The furniture was pristine, untouched by dust or decay. A sofa with floral upholstery, an old-fashioned lamp, a coffee table with a stack of magazines. It was as if the house was waiting for its occupants to return. And then I saw it. On the mantel above the fireplace was a photograph in a silver frame. My stomach churned as I stepped closer, the floorboards creaking underfoot. The photo showed a family of 4, a man, a woman, and 2 children. Their faces were blurred, like smudges on glass. But one face was clear. Mine. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. How was that possible? I'd never been here before. A sudden thud upstairs snapped me out of my panic. My head jerked toward the ceiling as the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway above me. "No," I whispered, backing toward the door. But when I turned to leave, the door was shut. I hadn't heard it close, but it was sealed tightly, as though it had never been open. The footsteps grew louder, moving toward the top of the staircase. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. A shadow appeared at the top of the stairs, humanoid but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Mistake. the shadow whispered, its voice low and garbled. I bolted. I didn't think about where I was going. My only thought was to get away. I stumbled through the house, the walls seeming to stretch and warp around me. Every time I thought I'd found the front door, it was gone, replaced by another corridor or doorway. The whispers followed me, growing louder with each turn. You've arrived. You've arrived. Finally, I burst into a room and slammed the door behind me. My hands fumbled for the lock, but there wasn't one. The whispers were louder now, like they were coming from inside the room. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. In the center of the room stood a figure, its face shrouded in darkness, and it was staring right at me. The figure didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. The air in the room grew colder with every passing second, and my body felt heavy, as though I was sinking into the floor. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The figure tilted its head slightly, the motion unnatural, like a marionette on strings. "You don't remember?" it said, its voice a low, rasping echo. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. "I've never been here before," I stammered, shaking my head. It took a step forward, its form flickering like static. "This is where you belong," it said, and the whispers began again, louder this time, overlapping into a chaotic chorus. The room started to warp, the walls bending inward like they were closing in on me. I glanced at the door, but it wasn't there anymore. Just smooth, featureless walls. The figure raised an arm, its hand elongating into something clawed. It pointed at the photograph on the mantel, and suddenly, it was in my hands. The faces of the family stared back at me, still blurry, except for mine. "What is this?" I shouted, throwing the picture to the ground. The frame shattered, and a low growl reverberated through the room. The figure flickered again, its voice now a distorted roar. "You took something from us." "I don't know what you're talking about," I screamed, my panic reaching a breaking point. The whispers coalesced into a single phrase, repeated over and over. "Give it back! Give it back!" "I don't have anything," I shouted, covering my ears. The figure stepped closer, its form now towering over me. Its clawed hand reached out, and when it touched my chest, searing pain shot through my body. I fell to my knees, gasping for air as the photograph burst into flames on the floor. The whispers stopped. For a moment, the room was silent. The figure loomed over me, its face still shrouded in darkness, but I could feel its eyes on me. "This is your home now," it said, its voice quieter, almost gentle. "You can't leave." The walls of the room dissolved into darkness, and I was back outside, in the middle of the street. I staggered to my feet, my chest still burning from where the figure had touched me. My breaths came in short, ragged gasps as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. The street was silent now, but the town hadn't changed. The same rows of lifeless houses loomed around me, their windows dark and watchful. The figure was gone, but its words echoed in my head. "This is your home now. You can't leave." I turned toward my car, the only thing that felt remotely real in this nightmare. It was exactly where I'd left it, headlights dim but still running. My legs wobbled as I stumbled toward it, every step feeling heavier, like the ground was trying to pull me back. When I reached the car, I threw the door open and collapsed into the driver's seat. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, desperate to get out of this place. The GPS screen flickered to life, the words, "Go home," glowing in eerie, pulsating letters. "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "I'm leaving." I slammed the car into reverse, spinning it around on the cracked asphalt. My tires screeched as I floored the gas, speeding back the way I'd come. The road stretched out before me, straight and empty, but the houses seemed to close in, their outlines blurry and shifting in the dim light. The clock on the dashboard still read 11:13 p.m., unmoving, as though time itself had stopped. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the wheel tighter. I didn't care about the time. I just wanted out. The whispers returned, faint at first, then louder, surrounding me like a swarm. "Stay!" they hissed. "You belong here." "No!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "I don't belong here!" The road twisted suddenly, the car swerving as the asphalt buckled and warped. The houses on either side melted into dark, jagged shapes that seemed to reach for the car, their outlines shifting unnaturally. I pressed harder on the gas, the engine roaring as I sped forward. Then the headlights illuminated something in the road ahead. It was the figure. It stood motionless in the center of the street, its form dark and towering, the edges of its shadow flickering like smoke. My foot slammed on the brake, the car screeching to a halt just feet from where it stood. The whispers stopped. The figure tilted its head, its face still hidden in shadow, and raised a clawed hand to point behind me. I glanced into the rearview mirror and my blood ran cold. The houses had vanished. Instead, there was nothing but blackness, an endless void swallowing the road behind me. The void was moving, creeping closer, devouring everything in its path. Panic surged through me. I turned back to the figure, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" It didn't respond. Instead, it stepped closer, its clawed fingers reaching for the hood of the car. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping in a deafening chorus. "Stay! Stay! Stay!" "No!" I screamed, slamming the car into reverse. The tires squealed as I backed away, the figure vanishing into the darkness as I turned the wheel sharply. The void was still behind me, but the road ahead had reappeared, straight and empty. I didn't question it. I hit the gas, speeding forward as fast as the car would go. The whispers faded gradually, replaced by the roar of the engine and my own ragged breathing. The clock on the dashboard flickered. 11:14 p.m. I let out a sob of relief as I realized the road was normal again. The houses were gone, the void had disappeared, and the sky was beginning to lighten, the faintest glow of dawn on the horizon. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The GPS screen beeped, drawing my attention. A new message appeared, the letters bold and unwavering. "You'll be back." My stomach churned as I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure again. But the back seat was empty. I pressed the gas pedal harder, determined to put as much distance as I could between me and that town. The whispers were gone, but their echo lingered in my mind, faint and insidious. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the sun was fully up, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. I turned off the car and stepped out, the cool morning air washing over me. For a moment I thought it was over. Then I saw it. A single scratch ran along the side of the car, deep and jagged, as though made by claws. And on the passenger seat, glowing faintly in the morning light, was the photograph from the house. This time, the family's faces were clear. All of them were mine. Have you ever experienced something strange on a late-night drive? Share this story with someone who loves mysterious and spine-chilling adventures. I wasn't supposed to be this deep in the woods. The trail I'd been following had disappeared hours ago, swallowed by thick undergrowth. My phone's battery was dead, and the only sounds were my ragged breathing and the occasional rustle of leaves. Just as panic began to set in, I saw it, a village, seemingly out of nowhere. It wasn't on any map I'd checked before the trip. The houses were small and old-fashioned, their windows darkened and their chimneys puffing faint trails of smoke. It looked alive, yet deserted at the same time. I walked cautiously down the cobblestone path, and that's when I heard the first voice. "Welcome home, Sophia." I spun around. An old man sat on a nearby bench, his expression unreadable. "Excuse me?" I stammered, taking a step back. He smiled faintly. "You've been gone too long." The man's words rattled in my head. "You've been gone too long." I stepped back, trying to put some distance between us, but my boots caught on the uneven cobblestones. "What do you mean?" "I've never been here before," I said, my voice shaking. His smile didn't waver. "You've always been here," he said simply. Then he turned away, standing slowly as if to leave. "Wait," I called, but he ignored me, shuffling down the path toward a small house with a thatched roof. The door creaked open, and he disappeared inside without another word. I stood there, frozen, my breath coming in short gasps. The village felt wrong, too quiet, too empty despite the faint trails of smoke rising from the chimneys. I turned in a slow circle, my eyes scanning the small cluster of homes. That's when I noticed them. Other villagers were stepping out of their homes, their faces lit with expressions of quiet recognition. Men, women, even children, all staring at me like they'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Welcome back, Sophia," a woman called from a porch, her voice calm and warm. "You've been missed," said another, a younger man leaning against a fence. Each voice felt like a punch to my chest. My name fell from their lips with such ease, as though they'd known me their entire lives. "I don't know you," I said loudly, my voice breaking. "Any of you." But they didn't seem to hear my protest. The woman on the porch waved me toward her. "Come, dear," she said, her smile widening. "Your house is waiting." I wanted to run, to leave this strange village and never look back. But the trail I'd come from was gone, replaced by thick woods that seemed to stretch endlessly. My pulse quickened. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice trembling. The woman only laughed lightly, like I'd said something silly. "You're home," she said. "We'll take you there." Before I could protest, she walked toward me, her arm extended as though to guide me. My instincts screamed at me to refuse, but my feet stayed rooted to the ground. I let her lead me, my legs stiff and unwilling, down the cobblestone path toward the edge of the village. Each step felt heavier than the last. The other villagers followed at a distance, their footsteps eerily synchronized. We stopped in front of a small house with a red door. It looked old but well kept, its windows glowing faintly from within as though someone had just lit the lamps. "This is yours," the woman said, gesturing to the door. "It's not mine," I said quickly, my voice sharper than I intended. Her smile faltered for just a moment. "You don't remember," she said softly, almost sadly. "That's all right. You will soon." I took a step back, shaking my head. "Number, I don't belong here. I'm not going inside." The villagers around us stopped, their expressions unchanged, but the air felt heavier, colder. "You must," the woman said, her tone now firmer. "It's where you're meant to be." Something about her words sent a chill down my spine. I glanced around hoping to find another way out, but the woods loomed in every direction. Every path I thought I'd seen earlier was gone, replaced by dense trees that seemed to watch me. My heart pounded as I turned back to the house. The door creaked open on its own, the warm glow spilling onto the cobblestones. Inside, the faint smell of lavender and something metallic drifted out. I hesitated. "What's inside?" "Your memories," the woman said simply. The villagers moved closer, their silent presence pressing against me like an invisible force. My breath hitched as I realized I had no choice. With trembling hands, I stepped across the threshold. The interior was cozy, almost too perfect, like a home pulled from the pages of a magazine. The furniture was worn but clean, the shelves lined with books and trinkets that felt oddly familiar. My eyes landed on the mantel above the fireplace where a photograph sat in an ornate frame. My knees buckled when I saw it. It was me. The photo showed me standing with a group of villagers, all of them smiling warmly. The faces were the same ones I'd just seen outside, and in the picture, I was smiling too, as though I'd known them my whole life. But I had no memory of ever being here. Behind me, the door slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the room. I spun around, but the woman and the other villagers were gone. I was alone, or so I thought. A low hum filled the air, soft and rhythmic, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. My chest tightened as I followed the sound, my feet moving despite my fear. The hum led me to a small door at the back of the house. It looked out of place, old and warped, with strange symbols carved into the wood. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. When I opened the door, the humming stopped. The room beyond was empty except for a single item, a mirror, and in its reflection, I wasn't alone. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. In the mirror's reflection, a figure stood behind me, a woman, her face pale and hollow, her eyes sunken and dark. She was dressed in a long, tattered gown, the fabric stained and fraying. Her hands hung limply at her sides, the fingers unnaturally long and claw-like. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart pounded as I turned back to the mirror. The woman hadn't moved, her reflection still lingering just over my shoulder. Slowly, her head tilted, her expression unreadable, and her lips parted. "Sophia," she whispered, her voice soft but carrying a weight that felt like a physical blow. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the edge of the warped doorframe. "Who are you?" I choked out. "What is this place?" The woman in the mirror didn't respond. Instead, the hum returned, louder now, reverberating through the walls of the house. The room around me seemed to flicker, the edges blurring like an old film strip. I turned away from the mirror, desperate to find a way out. The door I had entered through was gone, replaced by a solid wall of wood. The hum grew louder, almost unbearable, as if it were coming from the house itself. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and when I looked back, the woman was gone. In her place was me. But it wasn't me. The figure in the mirror wore my face, but her eyes were empty, her mouth twisted into a cold, humorless smile. She raised a hand, my hand, and pointed to the symbols carved into the doorframe. I stumbled back again, shaking my head. No. This isn't real. The mirror version of me tilted her head, mimicking the movement of the woman I'd seen earlier. Then she whispered, her voice overlapping with mine, "You belong here." The room began to warp, the walls bending inward like they were being pulled by invisible strings. The symbols on the doorframe glowed faintly, their lines shifting and rearranging themselves into something incomprehensible. I stumbled forward, gripping the edge of the doorframe for balance. "Let me out!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The hum stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it made my ears ring. Then a voice, low, deep, and resonating, spoke from everywhere and nowhere. "You left us behind, Sophia, but we never forgot you." "I don't even know you," I screamed, my voice trembling. The walls pulsed, the symbols glowing brighter, and the room stretched impossibly long, the mirror now a distant pinprick of light. "Remember," the voice commanded, each syllable cutting into me like a knife. Images flashed before my eyes, too fast to fully comprehend. Faces I didn't recognize but felt as though I should. Places that looked familiar, though I knew I'd never been there. Laughter, shouts, whispers, all disjointed, overlapping, suffocating me in their intensity. And then I saw it. The village. But it wasn't the same as before. This version was decayed, overgrown with vines, its cobblestone streets cracked and crumbling. The houses were charred ruins, their windows shattered and empty. In the center of the village stood the well, its edges jagged and blackened. A thick, dark mist rose from its depths, twisting upward like smoke. And standing around it were the villagers, silent, unmoving, their faces blank and lifeless. I staggered back, gasping for air. "This isn't real," I whispered, clutching my head. But the images didn't stop. I saw myself standing at the edge of the well, my hands outstretched as the villagers gathered around me. They weren't smiling anymore. Their eyes glowed faintly, their expressions cold and unfeeling. "You must drink," the voice said, and I realized it was my own voice. The images stopped as suddenly as they had begun, and I was back in the room with the mirror. My legs gave out and I collapsed to the floor, my breathing ragged. "Why me?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face. The symbols on the doorframe pulsed one last time before fading completely. The room stilled, the air no longer heavy with tension. I turned back to the mirror, and it was empty, just my reflection staring back at me. But the feeling of being watched hadn't left. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, I stood up, my legs trembling beneath me. I turned to the wall where the door had once been, and to my surprise, it was back. I opened it cautiously, expecting to find more horrors, but instead I was outside. The cobblestone streets were silent, the houses dark and empty. The village was the same as when I had first entered, but now it felt hollow. I walked to the edge of the clearing, praying I could find the path that had led me here. To my relief, the woods looked normal again, the dense trees parting just enough to reveal a narrow trail. I didn't hesitate. I ran. When I finally stumbled out of the woods and into the parking lot where I had left my car, it felt like waking from a nightmare. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. I climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel tightly as I tried to steady my breathing. My chest ached where the figure had touched me, and when I looked down, I saw faint marks, like burns, etched into my skin. As I started the engine, something in the passenger seat caught my eye. It was the photograph from the house, the one of me and the villagers. But now the faces were clear. The villagers were smiling, their eyes glowing faintly, and I was at the center, holding a cup as I stood beside the well. My reflection in the photo was smiling, but my eyes looked just like theirs. And at the bottom of the photograph, in faint, spidery handwriting, were the words, "You'll come back. They always do." What do you think the villagers wanted from Sophia? Follow for more spine-tingling stories that blur the line between reality and the supernatural.